The day I submitted my university application, an unknown number called and said, "Don't apply to Stanford." I laughed it off until the caller mentioned the private conversation I'd had with my mother that morning. "Wrong number," I said, already pulling the phone away from my ear, half smiling at the absurdity of it. A blocked number, a stranger's flat, unhurried voice, telling me not to submit an application I'd spent 4 years building my entire life toward. I had my thumb over the red button when the voice said one more thing, quietly, almost gently, like it hurt them to say it. "Your mother told you this morning that she never wanted you to know your father's real name. You were standing in the kitchen. She was crying into the coffee pot, so you wouldn't see her face." I didn't say anything. I couldn't have, even if I'd wanted to. Every word I owned had emptied out of me at once, the way a room empties when the power cuts and you're left standing in a darkness you didn't know was waiting. That conversation had happened 40 minutes earlier, in our kitchen, with the door closed. No one else in the house. If you've ever had a stranger prove they were watching you in a moment you thought was private, stay. This is the part where she finds out how deep it goes, and subscribing now means you won't miss the reveal in Chapter 5 that changes everything you think you know about her mother. "Who is this?" I said, finally, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Someone who's trying to keep you alive long enough to regret not listening," the voice said. "Don't submit the application, Emery. Not under your real name. Not to that school. You have until midnight." The line went dead before I could ask how they knew my name, my deadline, or the exact words my mother had used 40 minutes earlier while she thought I wasn't paying close enough attention to notice she was crying. I stood in my bedroom holding a phone that had gone silent again, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen where the Stanford application sat 2 clicks from submission. Essay finalized, transcripts uploaded, the little progress bar reading 98%. So close to done that I'd already started imagining the email that would eventually tell me whether 4 years of 11 o'clock nights had been worth it. I told myself it was a prank. Someone from school, maybe, someone who'd overheard my mother somehow, some elaborate cruelty designed to rattle me before deadline day. I'd read about this, senior year scams, kids calling other kids' houses pretending to be college reps, pretending to be anything that might knock a rival off their game 2 hours before a deadline. It made sense. It was the only version of this that let me keep breathing normally. Except I didn't have rivals who knew what my mother said to herself over a coffee pot at 7 in the morning. I went downstairs. My mother was at the kitchen table, exactly where she'd been that morning, except now she was grading papers instead of crying, red pen moving and steady, efficient strokes across a stack of 9th-grade essays, her reading glasses pushed up into her hair the way they always were when she needed a break from squinting. "Mom." I stood in the doorway, my legs suddenly unwilling to carry me any closer. "Did you tell anyone about this morning? About what you said in here?" She looked up, and something flickered behind her eyes before she caught it and smoothed it away, fast enough that if I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it entirely. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "This morning, in the kitchen, you were crying, and you said you never wanted me to know Dad's real name." The words felt strange in my mouth, like I was reciting someone else's memory rather than my own, even though I'd lived every second of it. "I just got a call." Someone repeated it back to me, word for word. The red pen stopped moving. My mother had spent 18 years being the calmest person I knew, the one who talked me down from panic attacks before AP exams, who never raised her voice even when I deserved it, who once handled a kitchen grease fire with the same, even tone she used to ask if I wanted seconds at dinner. I had never, not once in my life, seen the particular kind of stillness that came over her face in that moment. The stillness of someone doing very fast, very silent math about how much time she had left before something she'd been outrunning finally caught up. "What number called you?" she said. Her voice had gone flat, careful, a voice I didn't recognize wearing my mother's mouth. "Emery, what number?" "It was blocked." "Mom, what is going on?" She was already standing, already moving toward the front window, already reaching to pull the curtain aside just enough to check the street outside, and I understood, watching her do it, that whatever this was, my mother had been waiting for it for a very long time. "Nobody," she said, letting the curtain fall back into place. "There's no one out there. I was just checking." But she pulled the deadbolt across the front door anyway, a lock I'd never once seen her use in daylight, and stood with her back against it like she needed the weight of the wood behind her to keep standing upright. "Mom, you're scaring me." "I know." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a moment, and when she dropped them, Some of the careful mask had come back, though not all of it. Not enough to convince me anymore. I need you to trust me on something, and I need you to do it without an explanation tonight, because I don't have one I can give you in the next 2 hours that won't take the rest of the night to finish. The application's due at midnight. I know when it's due. Her voice cracked, just slightly on the word due. I need you to hold off submitting it. Just for a few days. Just until I can make some calls. Mom, this is Stanford. I've been working toward this since freshman year. You're the one who told me to apply in the first place. I stopped because something in her face had shifted at that, something like guilt layered under the fear, and I understood, with a lurch that felt physical, that this wasn't the first time tonight my mother had contradicted a version of herself I thought I knew completely. I know I did, she said quietly. I didn't think it would ever actually come to this. I thought there was more time, or that it wouldn't matter, that everything from before was far enough behind us that a college application couldn't possibly reach back, and she stopped herself. Visibly, the sentence cut off like a wire. Before what? I asked. Mom, what happened before? She didn't answer. Instead, she crossed the kitchen, pulled her phone from her bag, and dialed a number from memory. Not looked up, not scrolled to, dialed the way you dial something you've had memorized for years without ever wanting to use it. She walked into the hallway to take the call, but not far enough that I couldn't hear fragments of it drifting back toward the kitchen. I don't know how they found out. I need you to tell me if this is real. She's 18. She doesn't know anything. You promised me she wouldn't have to. If he's out, I need to know exactly how long we have. I stood frozen at the kitchen table, my laptop still open upstairs with a 98% complete application waiting for a decision I no longer felt equipped to make alone, and listened to my mother speak to someone in the tone of a woman negotiating for something much larger than a delayed deadline. When she came back into the kitchen, her face had gone the particular gray of someone who has just been told bad news is worse than she'd hoped and better than she'd feared, both at once. I need you to pack a bag, she said. Just for a few days. We're going to stay somewhere else while I sort this out. Mom. I stood so fast my chair scraped hard against the floor. You don't get to say something like that and then tell me to pack a bag like we're leaving for a weekend trip. Who was that? What is going on? What did that man mean, my father's real name? Is Dad even his real name? Is anything I know about our family real? My mother looked at me for a long moment, and something in her expression finally cracked all the way open, years of careful architecture giving way at once. Your father's name was never Daniel Hale, she said. That's the name I gave you, because it was safer than the truth. I've been protecting you from something for 18 years, Emery, and tonight, for reasons I still don't fully understand, it found us anyway. Behind her, through the kitchen window, headlights swept slowly across our driveway and stopped. The headlights sat there for 3 full seconds before cutting out, and in those 3 seconds I watched my mother do something I'd never once seen her do in 18 years of raising me alone. She reached into the drawer beneath the silverware, the one I'd always assumed held takeout menus and spare batteries, and pulled out a handgun with the practiced, unthinking motion of someone who had trained for exactly this moment more than once. Mom. Stay behind me. Her voice had gone into a register I didn't recognize, calm in a way that was somehow more frightening than panic would have been. She moved to the front door, checked the peephole, and I watched her shoulders drop half an inch, not all the way, but enough that I understood whoever was out there wasn't the threat she'd braced for. She opened the door to a man standing on our porch in a plain gray jacket, hands visible, empty, held slightly away from his body in a gesture I'd only ever seen in movies, the universal posture of someone announcing they weren't a danger before they'd said a single word. Rachel, he said, and my mother flinched so hard at the name that I nearly reached out to steady her. I'm sorry to come like this. I tried calling ahead. Your line's probably being monitored, which is exactly why I didn't want to risk it a second time. Rachel, I repeated, the name landing strange and wrong in my mouth, like a key that almost fit a lock, but not quite. Mom, why is he calling you Rachel? Neither of them answered me right away. My mother stood in the doorway studying the man's face with an intensity that suggested she was matching it against a memory that had aged in the years since she'd last needed it, and then, slowly, something in her posture eased, not trust exactly, but recognition. Marshall Reyes, she said. It's been a long time. 14 years, he said. I wish I were here under better circumstances. His eyes moved past her to me, taking in my face with the same careful assessment my mother had just given his. "You must be Emery. You look like her. The old her, I mean. Before." "Before what?" I said, and I heard my own voice shaking now, the adrenaline of the gun, the locked door, the headlights, all of it catching up to me at once. Somebody needs to start explaining things to me right now, because I have an application due in 90 minutes and apparently a dead father who isn't actually dead, and a mother whose real name I didn't know until 30 seconds ago. Marshall Reyes glanced at my mother, a silent question, and she nodded, the particular nod of someone giving up on protecting a version of the truth she'd spent almost 2 decades constructing.
"Can I come in?" he said.
This isn't a conversation for a porch. He sat at our kitchen table like he'd done it before, in some other house, some other version of our life, and pulled a thin folder from inside his jacket. Not dramatic, not a file marked classified, just an ordinary manila folder that had clearly been handled many times, its corners soft and rounded from years in someone's bag. 18 years ago, your mother testified in a federal case against a man named Walter Sorensen, he said. Venture capitalist. Very well connected, very well funded, and responsible for covering up the death of a young research partner at a lab he financed near Stanford's campus. Your mother was engaged to that research partner at the time he died. She's the one who found the falsified safety reports. She's the one who testified they'd been altered after the fact, at Sorensen's direction, to protect a 9-figure investment round. He paused, watching my face carefully. Sorensen went to prison for obstruction and manslaughter. Your mother and I relocated her under a new identity 3 months later, once the threats against her became specific enough to take seriously. I looked at my mother, who was staring at the table like it might offer her somewhere else to look. The research partner, I said slowly, already knowing the answer and needing to hear it anyway. That was my father. His name was Michael Voss, Marshall Reyes said quietly. He died 9 weeks before you were born. So my father didn't leave us, I said. He didn't die of a heart condition when I was 2, like you told me every single time I asked. He was murdered, and you've been lying to me my entire life to protect me from a man who's apparently still out there. My mother finally looked up, and her eyes were wet, and for the first time since I'd come downstairs that night, she looked less like she was protecting a secret and more like she was drowning in the weight of having kept one for so long. He was released on parole 11 months ago, she said. We think he's the one who found us. We think this call tonight means he already knows exactly who you are and exactly where you're planning to apply. Why Stanford? I said. Out of everything I could have applied to, why does it matter that it's specifically that school? Marshall Reyes exchanged a look with my mother before he answered. Sorensen still has significant ties to the university. He funded a research building before his conviction, and the foundation that still bears his name administers a scholarship program tied to the same department your father worked in. Any application flagged with your father's original surname, Voss, going through that department's admissions pipeline would almost certainly cross paths with people still loyal to Sorensen's foundation, people who monitor exactly this kind of thing for him, even from prison, even now, on parole with restrictions he doesn't seem particularly interested in honoring. He tapped the folder. We think that's how this happened. Your transcript request. Somewhere in the system, an old flag from your father's name, cross-referenced with your mother's original identity, got noticed by someone who still reports back to him. I used my mother's name, I said. Halle, not Voss. I've never even heard the name Voss until 5 minutes ago. Your birth certificate was never fully sealed, my mother said quietly. I was told it would be. I believed it because believing it was easier than checking. When the state processed your transcript release for the application, it may have pulled from an older record that hadn't been fully scrubbed. I don't know for certain. I only know someone found us, and I know it happened the same week you submitted. Her hands, folded on the table, were trembling. I should have checked. I should have triple-checked, every year, instead of letting myself believe 18 years of quiet meant it was actually over. So what happens now? I asked. Do I not apply? Do I just give up on this because a man I've never met, who killed my father before I was even born, might notice my name in a database? That's not what anyone's asking you to do, Marshall Reyes said carefully. But applying under your current information, tonight, without adjustments, isn't safe. Not until we understand exactly how much he knows and exactly how he's watching. There are ways to submit an application that don't run through the same flagged channels, different documentation, a sealed record request expedited through my office, a few days delay while we close the gap he's using to reach you. What we're asking is for few days. Not forever. Not the dream. Just enough time to make sure applying to your first choice school doesn't also mean handing a convicted felon your current address. I sat with that, my pulse loud in my ears, the 98% complete application sitting upstairs like a countdown I no longer had full control over. And if I wait, I said, and he finds another way in the meantime? What if a few days becomes a few months becomes never? The way Dad being dead became a story I believed my entire life, because it was easier than the truth. My mother reached across the table and took my hand, the first time she'd touched me since I'd come downstairs, her grip firmer than I expected from someone who looked like she was drowning 10 minutes earlier. I am not going to let you lose this the way I lost him, she said. I have spent 18 years building a life quiet enough that nobody could take anything else from us. I am not asking you to give up Stanford. I am asking you to let me help you get there without walking in through the exact door he's watching. Marshall Reyes cleared his throat, glancing toward the window, and something in his posture had shifted, gone alert in a way that made the hair on my arms rise before he even spoke. We should move this conversation somewhere else, he said quietly. That car that pulled up earlier, it hasn't left. It's just been sitting at the end of the block for the last 6 minutes. Engine off, lights out. We left through the back door, the three of us, my mother gripping a bag she'd packed in under 4 minutes flat with the muscle memory of a woman who'd done it before and hoped she'd never have to again. Marshall Reyes's car was parked 2 streets over, angled for a fast exit, and I understood, climbing into the back seat with my laptop clutched against my chest like a life raft, that whatever life I'd been living that morning had ended somewhere between the kitchen table and this moment. Where are we going? I asked, once we were moving, streetlights sliding past the windows in a rhythm too calm for how fast my heart was beating. Somewhere I can make you both disappear from a database search for a few days without it looking suspicious, Marshall Reyes said. There's a safe property about 90 minutes north. Not glamorous. Secure. My mother sat beside me in the back seat, her hand still wrapped around mine, and for the first time all night, she started actually talking instead of managing what I was allowed to know. Your father and I met at the lab, she said quietly, watching the dark road slide by. He wasn't supposed to be the one who found the falsified reports. That was supposed to be my discovery, and I've spent 18 years wondering if things would have gone differently if I hadn't shown them to him first, if I'd taken it straight to the board instead of to the person I loved. Her voice caught. He wanted to do the right thing immediately. I wanted to wait, gather more evidence, make the case airtight before we went up against a man with Sorensen's resources. We fought about it, the week before he died. It was the last real conversation we ever had, and I've never told anyone that, not even the Marshalls, because admitting it means admitting some part of what happened to him might trace back to a delay I asked for. Mom, that's not the same as him killing Dad. I know that. Some nights, I still don't fully believe it. She squeezed my hand. I applied to Stanford for you, pushed you toward it because some selfish part of me wanted you to finish something he started. I thought enough time had passed that the risk had faded into something theoretical. I was wrong, and I am so sorry that being wrong might cost you the one thing you've worked hardest for. Marshall Reyes's phone buzzed on the dashboard mount, and he glanced at it without picking it up, his jaw tightening at whatever appeared on the screen. That's my office, he said. They've been trying to confirm Sorensen's location for the last hour. I need to take this. He answered on speaker without thinking, or maybe deliberately because the voice on the other end was already talking before any of us could object. Confirmed GPS on the ankle monitor shows him at a residence 40 minutes from the Hale address as of 9:40 tonight. That's a parole violation on its own. We're dispatching for a compliance check now, but Reyes, there's something else you need to hear before you get there. Go ahead, Reyes said, glancing at us in the rearview mirror. We pulled the phone records on the number that called the girl tonight. It's not Sorensen's line. It traces back to a burner registered under a name we didn't expect. A pause, papers shuffling audibly on the other end. It's registered to a Michael Voss. The car went completely silent except for the sound of the tires on the highway, and beside me, my mother made a sound I had never heard her make before. Not a gasp, not a sob, something in between, the sound of a woman hearing a dead man's name spoken in the present tense for the first time in 18 years. That's not possible, my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's dead. I identified him. I sat in a room and identified his body 18 years ago. I don't. She stopped, pressing a shaking hand over her mouth, and I watched her run back through 18 years of certainty in real time, searching for the crack she'd never let herself look for. It could be a spoofed registration, Marshall Reyes said carefully, though I could hear in his own voice that he didn't fully believe it either. Sorensen's people have the resources to fake documentation like that, to throw us exactly the kind of curveball that keeps us chasing a ghost instead of watching him. Or, it isn't spoofed, I said, and both adults turned to look at me.
Mom.
You said you identified the body. Did you actually see his face? Or, did someone show you something and tell you it was him? My mother's silence lasted long enough to answer the question before she said anything at all. It was a closed casket, she said finally. The lab fire there wasn't much left to identify visually. They used dental records. I never saw his face again after the morning he left for that meeting with Sorensen's board. She looked up at me, something raw and unguarded moving across her features. I never let myself consider that dental records could be manipulated by a man with enough money to make an inconvenient witness disappear instead of die. So, he could be alive, I said slowly, the shape of it settling into me strange and enormous. My father could actually be alive, and the call tonight wasn't a threat. It was him, trying to warn me away from a school where Sorensen's people would recognize a name he spent 18 years hiding from too. We don't know that, Marshall Reyes said, though he'd already pulled the car onto the shoulder, phone pressed to his ear again, talking low and fast to whoever was still on the other end about pulling every available record on the burner phone's location history. I need confirmation before anyone gets ahead of themselves on this. But I was already thinking about the voice on the phone. Someone's trying to keep you alive long enough to regret not listening, the specific tenderness underneath the warning, the way it hadn't sounded like a threat even in the moment. More like the voice of someone who'd spent a very long time watching from a distance and had finally run out of ability to stay silent. He knew what Mom said to me this morning, I said, in the kitchen, about never wanting me to know his real name. How would Sorensen's people know that unless they'd bugged our house? And if they'd bugged our house, why would they warn me away from Stanford instead of just letting me walk into whatever trap they'd built there? Nobody answered, because nobody had an answer. And the three of us sat in a car pulled over on the shoulder of a dark highway while somewhere, possibly 40 minutes away, possibly much closer, a man who might be my dead father, or might be an elaborate lie built to unravel what was left of my mother's careful, quiet life, waited to see what I did next. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from the same blocked number. You have until midnight. After that, I can't protect you from what happens if you submit it under your real information. Please. Trust me on this one thing, even though I've never earned the right to ask you to. I typed back before I let myself think too hard about it, my thumbs unsteady against the screen. If you're really him, prove it. Tell me something only my father would know. The reply took almost 4 full minutes, long enough that I started to believe I'd imagined the entire exchange, long enough for Marshall Reyes to get off his own call and start explaining, gently, that impersonation was common in cases like this, that grief made people vulnerable to exactly this kind of manipulation, that I shouldn't. My phone buzzed again. Your mother used to sing to you before you were born. Off-key, on purpose, because I told her the baby would come out with better pitch if she stopped trying so hard to be good at it. She called it our joke. I don't know if she ever told you that, or if she buried it with everything else she buried the day she thought I died. I turned the phone so my mother could see it, and watched her face collapse in on itself, the particular devastation of a private joke resurrected by someone who had no business still being alive to remember it. Nobody knows that, she whispered. I never told anyone that. Not the Marshalls, not my sister, no one. Mom. I kept my voice as steady as I could manage. What if it's really him? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had gone somewhere I'd never heard it go before, somewhere between hope and a very specific, hard-earned terror of hoping for the wrong thing. Then he spent 18 years letting me believe I got him killed by asking him to wait, she said. And I don't know yet whether that makes him the kind of man who ran to protect us, or the kind of man who let us grieve him rather than find a way to come back. Marshall Reyes pulled back onto the highway, jaw tight, already dialing his office again to redirect the search parameters, and I sat in the back seat with my phone glowing in my hands, staring at a message from a dead man who might not be dead, weighing a truth that could either give me back a father or hand me an elaborate cruelty designed by the very people who'd taken him in the first place. If you're really him, I typed, why now? Why not 18 years of birthdays? 18 years of every single day you could have found a way to reach us. The answer came faster this time. Because I've spent 18 years believing that reaching you would be the thing that finally got you both killed. I only broke that rule tonight because I found out this morning that Sorensen's foundation flagged your application before either of you knew he was even watching. I would rather you hate me forever for staying gone than lose you both, because I couldn't stay quiet one more time. I looked up at my mother, who was reading over my shoulder, tears tracking silently down her face in the dim light of the car, and understood that whatever happened at midnight, whether I submitted that application under my real name, under a protected new one, or not at all, the deadline I'd been dreading all evening had already become the smallest question in a night that had rewritten everything else I thought I knew. I want to meet him, I said. Tonight. Before I decide anything about Stanford, before anyone decides anything for me. I want to see if the man on the other end of that phone is actually my father, or if he's the last piece of a lie Mom's been protecting me from for 18 years. Marshall Reyes met my eyes in the rearview mirror, and for the first time since he'd shown up on our porch, he looked less like a man following protocol and more like someone deciding whether protocol was even still the right tool for the situation in front of him. That's not a safe request, he said. Neither is anything else that's happened tonight, I said. I'd rather walk into the truth than keep living inside somebody else's version of it. He was waiting in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner off the interstate, standing under a flickering sign with his hands in his pockets, and I knew him before Marshall Reyes had even fully stopped the car, not from memory, I had none, but from the particular way my mother's breath caught beside me, a sound I'd never heard her make in 18 years of birthdays spent explaining a dead man's absence. He was older than the one photograph I'd grown up with, grayer, thinner, with a scar along his jaw that hadn't been there in the picture on our mantel. But his eyes, when they found my mother's face through the windshield, held the exact unguarded devastation of a man who had spent 18 years rehearsing this moment and still hadn't prepared himself for how much it would cost to actually live it. My mother was out of the car before it had fully stopped, and I watched, frozen in the back seat, as two people who'd spent nearly 2 decades believing the other one was dead stood 4 feet apart in a diner parking lot, neither of them quite brave enough to close the distance, both of them crying in the specific, silent way of people who'd taught themselves long ago not to make a sound. Michael, she said, like she was testing whether the name still worked. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. For the 18 years, for the lie, for every birthday I watched from far enough away that you never knew I was there. His eyes moved past her to me, and something in his face broke open completely. Emery.
God.
You have her stubbornness and my questions. I've read every essay you ever posted online for a school assignment. I know that's not the same as being there. I know it doesn't undo anything. I didn't run to him. I want to be honest about that, because I think this story would be easier to tell if I had, but the truth is I stood beside the car for a long moment, taking in a stranger wearing my father's eyes, and felt something more complicated than joy, grief for the 18 years I hadn't known to grieve, anger I wasn't ready to name yet, and underneath both of those, something smaller and more fragile that might, eventually with time, become the beginning of knowing him. I have questions, I said. A lot of them. Tonight isn't going to answer all of them. No, he agreed. It won't. I'll answer every one you're willing to ask, for as long as it takes, if you'll let me. We didn't resolve Sorensen that night. The compliance check on his ankle monitor turned into a federal investigation that took another 4 months to fully unravel, uncovering a network of contacts still feeding him information from inside the foundation he'd built, information Marshall Reyes's office spent the better part of a year dismantling piece by piece. My father testified again, this time from behind protections 18 years of hiding had taught him to demand. Sorensen's parole was revoked. It wasn't a clean ending. Nothing about it felt like the movies made betrayal and reunion look. No single dramatic courtroom moment where everything got fixed at once, just a slow, unglamorous accumulation of paperwork and hearings and careful, monitored calls between a father and daughter still learning each other's rhythms. I submitted my application 4 days later. Under updated documentation Marshall Reyes's office helped process, routed away from whatever flagged channel had nearly exposed us. I got in. I don't know, even now, how much of that acceptance was earned and how much of it was simply the version of my life that survived long enough to find out. My father and I talk twice a week now, careful, unhurried conversations that are still learning how to be ordinary. My mother sings off-key sometimes on purpose, when she thinks no one's listening, and I've started letting her know that I hear it, because I think some jokes deserve to be resurrected out loud instead of kept buried for safety's sake. I think about that first call sometimes, the flat, careful voice telling me not to apply, and I understand now that it wasn't a threat at all. It was the first thing my father had said to me in 18 years, and he'd chosen, out of everything he could have led with, to try to protect the one dream he'd never gotten to watch me build. Should Emery's mother have told her the truth about her father years earlier? Or was protecting her the right call, even at this cost? Comment: tell her sooner or protect at all costs. And her father? 18 years of silence to keep them safe, or 18 years he should have found a way around. Comment: he did what he had to, or he owed them more. Your votes decide how much Sorensen gets to answer for in the next one. If this story kept you up past your own deadline, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for the next reveal.